go. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Amanda Baker, and I am an assistant director at the Career Development Center at Westchester University. Tonight, we're going to be talking to you about the differences and similarities between governmental and nonprofit resumes. I'm joined tonight by Angela Klein. Do you want to say hello?
Hi, everyone. I am Angela Klein. I'm the MPA director and an associate professor in the Department of Public Policy and Administration. I thank Amanda Baker from the Career Development Center for covering this topic. I know it's relevant to many of our MPA students, and I know she's going to cover a lot of the nuts and bolts, but I'm also available later on in the week or next week to answer any questions. But yes, thank you.
All right. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and share my screen. I have pretty little PowerPoint slides. Whoops, let's see. All right, hopefully you are all seeing that. So tonight we're going to talk about federal and nonprofit resume writing, primarily targeted at graduate students. You are welcome to take pictures of any of my slides. The recording will be available on YouTube within a few days. And I do plan to stick around to answer any questions. If you do have questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat. I will try to check in on that throughout the event. And we will go from there. Okay. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the programs and services offered at the Career Development Center for graduate students. Everything I'm going to talk about tonight, you can schedule a one-on-one 30-minute appointment with a career counselor. We can help with things like, what careers go with your major or your graduate degree, a job or internship search. If you're going on for additional graduate school, we can help with those applications. We can help with resume and cover letter writing or writing a CV or any other application documents you might need. We can help with interview preparation, everyone's favorite networking, and we do have several identity-based resources. We also have lots of ways of connecting you with employers and alumni through job and internship fairs, meetups, and so forth. This is a great slide to take a picture of. This is our fall slate of events. I would like to point out the job and internship fair on September 27th from 12 to 4, and the volunteer and nonprofit fair on October 3rd, and I have more information about those. So we are doing an open house this year on Wednesday, September 20th from 10 to 3 p.m. On main campus in 225 Lawrence Hall. If you are interested in attending, there may or may not be dessert tacos, I'm just saying, but we'll have some employers present. You can get a free headshot. You can learn about our resources. There will be prizes and food and games and crafts and all kinds of fun things. Our job and internship fair is coming up on September 27th. That's a Wednesday. It is in the Student Rec Center on campus from noon to 4 p.m. We have 144 companies registered to attend at this time. I expect that number to get up to closer to 150. And as of right now, we have 13 nonprofit organizations slated to attend and 11 governmental agencies planning to attend this event. And we have a volunteer and nonprofit internship fair coming up on Tuesday, October 3rd from 11 to 2 on main campus in Sykes Ballrooms. I looked at the number earlier. I think there are 28 employers registered to attend. It'll probably be closer to 30 to 40 by the time we get to the day of the event. And if there are questions, again, feel free to put those in the chat and I will answer those as we go along. Before I jump into resumes, doesn't look like there are any questions at this time, but if there are, please feel free to fire away. So let's talk a little bit about resume writing. Here we go. I wanted to talk primarily about the differences between the two documents. A federal resume is very, very structured. It's usually many, many pages long. It is primarily used on the website usajobs.gov. It is a very rigid format. You generally want a plain text version. This is not the place for graphics and color and pretty things. You need to be very thorough and very specific, and you really want to write out everything. Whereas a nonprofit resume has a lot more room for personality, creativity. I would say it's very, very similar to a for-profit resume. Usually a nonprofit resume should be 1 to 2 pages at most. A CV can be a bit longer and is usually used by someone with a doctoral degree who's going into academia. Otherwise, you need a 1 to 2 page document. Idealist.org and jobs.philanthropy.com are two of my favorite sites to look for positions with nonprofit organizations. In terms of your format, I think you can use a little bit more color, a little bit more style. You can kind of let your personality come through a little bit more. The content should be directly related to the position and the organization you are applying for. It's really important with nonprofit organizations to show a fit with the culture and the mission. Acronyms, I think, can be used as long as you know your reader would know what they are. I think it's okay to use an acronym, but when in doubt, write it out. So those are kind of the main differences, I would say, between the two documents. And then we're going to go section by section and talk about some of the similarities and differences. So for contact information, on a federal resume, you want to put your full legal name, including your middle initial. On a nonprofit resume or a for-profit or a CV, you can use a nickname, you can use a preferred name. Some people will put their full name and then a preferred name in parentheses. I've noticed a lot of international students will do this if they have a more American sounding name. For example, on a federal resume, you always put your full mailing address, your phone number, and your email address. On a nonprofit resume, we recommend only listing the city and state where you are looking for a position for privacy, or you can leave this off altogether and simply list one phone number and one email address where you can get a good message. In addition, on a nonprofit resume, if you have a blog, if you have a LinkedIn profile, if you have any kind of website, you can list that URL kind of with your contact information at the top of the page. On a federal resume, the extra pieces of information are your security clearance, if you have one, the level of your security clearance, your country of citizenship, and your veterans preference, excuse me. So these are things that would never really be used unless you were specifically looking at a federal resume. You would never put your citizenship on a nonprofit resume. You would never put your country of your security clearance. Those things probably wouldn't be relevant or necessary. Oh, here we go. On the nonprofit, you have the option to put a profile or a summary statement. It's really important to emphasize your strengths and your skills. A summary should be the most important things you want a potential employer to know about you. Perhaps it's your years of experience. Perhaps it's a unique skill that you have. Maybe this is a good place to demonstrate your connection to the culture and mission of the organization you are applying to. This is not the place to repeat information that's going to appear elsewhere on the document. A lot of undergraduates the first thing in their summary will be their degree that they're earning. Well, that goes into your education section, not in your summary. The things on your summary should be backed up by the other things on your resume, but it truly should be a summary of your years of experience, your skills, and your strengths, and not repetitive of information we're going to see elsewhere on the document. You would generally not use a profile or a summary on a federal resume. If you are using, which I highly recommend, the resume builder in usajobs.gov, there's no place to add it, so you wouldn't need it. Both are going to include an education section, and I thought the chart was I tried several ways of presenting this information, and the chart seemed the most straightforward, because a federal resume requires a lot more than a nonprofit resume. So for both, you need the name of the institution, Westchester University of Pennsylvania, the city and state or city and country where it was located, Westchester, PA, and yes, Westchester University of Pennsylvania, Westchester, PA seems redundant, but it's important to put all of this information on both a federal resume and a nonprofit resume. Now, you want to make sure you add both your degree and your major. So the mistake I see is people will list just their major and not their degree, right? So it might be a Master of Public Administration, it might be a Master of Science, and then what is that degree in? If you have minors or concentrations, you can add those as well. Of course, most of you are in graduate school at this time, so you'll want to make sure you list both your graduate degree, your current graduate degree first in reverse chronological order, and then your undergraduate degree. For both, we want to include the month and year of graduation, not the range of dates you've been in school. So most people graduate in May, August, or December. So make sure that you are listing the appropriate month and year that you graduated. Not required on a federal resume and not really any place for it, but on a nonprofit resume, you do have the option of listing your thesis or dissertation title. This is a good place if you just want to list the title. If you actually want to talk in depth about the research, that'll come in a few minutes. On a federal resume, you are required to put things like your honors, any academic awards, things like scholarships or dean's list, your GPA, any relevant coursework, and federal resumes expect high school information. All of you as master's students, or really by the time you are a junior, senior in undergrad, need to let all of the high school information drop off your resume, with the exception of if it is directly related to the thing you are applying for now, you might be able to keep it, but in most cases, time to let high school go. Relevant coursework, I would say, is optional on a nonprofit resume, and never include high school information on a resume. On USA Jobs, there should be, looks like we have a question on where the coursework goes. On USA Jobs, there should be a section to list your courses, or there might be a place to upload a transcript depending on the position you are applying for. Again, you want to use the resume builder that USA Jobs provides to you, and there should be a place to add that information in the resume builder. It's real similar to building a LinkedIn profile, if you've ever done that. All right. So the experience section is the most important part of both resumes. This is the place where you can tell an employer what you have done, how you have done it, and really get into detail about your skills, your abilities, your transferable skills, and so forth. On a nonprofit resume, you might separate out sections, like you might have your volunteer and community service under a separate heading from, say, your related jobs and work history, or you might have a separate section for research experience. If you are fresh out of undergrad or do a lot of clubs, organizations, and activities, again, you might have a separate heading for those. So on a nonprofit resume, you can have maybe 3 to 4 sections of experiences. On a federal resume, they all go under the same section or the same heading. So on a nonprofit resume, for each experience, you want to list your job title or role, even if it's a researcher, mentor, member, volunteer. We need the name of the organization or company or club that you are a part of. We need the city and state within the United States, or the city and country if it was outside the United States, and then the range of dates that you were part of that organization or worked at that company. Range of dates should go month and year to month and year. If you are still employed, you can use present or current as the end date on a nonprofit resume. On a federal resume, Again, there's a resume builder in USA Jobs that has a space for all of this. You need your job title, your organization, organization, university name, club name. So literally all of your experiences go under the experience section on a federal resume. So I recommend putting them in order by date, with the most recent thing first. Any research, any teaching, any practicums, assistantships, related jobs, activities, all of your work history, all of your clubs, all of it goes under the same experience section on a federal resume. You need the organization or club or university or employer name, the location with the full street address. Whereas on a nonprofit resume, you'd only be listing the city and state. On a federal resume, full street address of the organization. The range of dates by month and year, the total number of hours per week that you worked. Now, if it wasn't work, you could still say you were a volunteer for 5 hours a week, or maybe it was a research project that you did for 2 hours a week. You've got to include the number of hours per week. They also want to see your supervisor's name and phone number, and there's a yes or no, can that supervisor be contacted? If you haven't already and you want a federal job, it's a really good idea to start to pull this information together. The farther you get into your career, the harder it is to remember who your supervisor was at a past position, or maybe that supervisor has moved on and you don't know how to contact them. So I would strongly urge you to gather as much of this information as possible before starting to use the resume builder on USA Jobs. All right, so again, the most important part is how you describe your experiences. So think about the who, what, when, where, how, why. Who were you helping? Who were you working with? Who were your primary clients or students or customers? What were your outcomes? What were your accomplishments? What are the things you are most proud of from the different positions that you have had? And make sure those things are listed first. When you're thinking about writing a resume of your past experiences, you want to show that you have the skills of the next experience you're going for. So demonstrating your outcomes and accomplishments is a great way to do that. When or how often did you do your tasks? Really, anything you can quantify on a resume helps you. Were you, reviewing 50 documents a week? Were you supervising 12 volunteers? Whatever it was, if you can quantify, did you fundraise $10,000? Whatever it might be, anything you can quantify to show how you did your tasks, how often you did your tasks, how much you did your tasks can help. Where were you? What kind of setting were you in? Is that relevant? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. How were you spending your time on the job? I always say, if I was watching you do your job, what is it I would see you doing day in and day out? And then what are the things you're most proud of or accomplished? And then why? Why did you do these tasks? Did you have a purpose? Was there some kind of outcome or goal that you were hoping to get to through doing these kinds of tasks? So these are good kind of questions to think about as you are writing the bullet points of your resume. And on a federal resume, you really want to be verbose and thorough, right? So I would expect 7 to 10 bullet points for every job you're listing on a federal resume or more. On a nonprofit resume, 3 to 5 bullet points is probably plenty, maybe less if it was a volunteer experience or an undergraduate student activity. So I know this is a text heavy page, and it's, I think, worth taking a picture of. Who would you hire? And I'm not meaning to insult your intelligence by reading these things, but duties included taking field measurements and maintaining records, setting up and tracking project using Microsoft Project, and developing computerized material takeoff sheets. This is the kind of thing I see very commonly on a resume. But wouldn't you rather hire the person that says initiated and managed tracking systems used for the Green District Water Decontamination Project, saving $125,000 on the overall project through a 30% decrease of staff allocation time? Of course you would. And all we did was try and quantify what that person was doing and how they were doing it. So when you're trying to think about how you can use numbers on your resume, you can use range, frequency, and scale. And I'll take a moment to thank the Muse for some of these examples. So I see responsible for on resumes all the time. Please avoid responsible for or duties included. These are unnecessary phrases that don't help you. If you start your bullet points with power verbs, supervised, edited, managed, assisted, this is a much stronger way to start that bullet point. It also helps you avoid the I, me, and my on a resume that we just don't need. If you write in phrases, it will have more impact and it will get you noticed more than in writing in paragraphs. Right? So if you're working with people, how many people? Supervise 7 to 12 undergraduate research students each year. Frequency. So if you're doing something regularly, where you're doing it, a lot of it every week or a lot of it every day, how can you quantify that? So in this case, completed the first editing pass on articles. Well, how many articles? 40 to 50 articles per week. That gives some weight to what this person was able to do. If it was 40 to 50 articles per month, right, it would be a very different feeling that we have about this person's ability. So try and think about frequency or think about scale. If you can't remember the exact number, maybe you were doing a fundraising project as an undergrad and you just can't remember how much money you raised, you can use approximately, or you can use a range, right? So saving $200,000 to $350,000 per year is close enough, right? A close enough range that it's probably in that range somewhere. Or instead of saying responsible for chairing a committee, which is great, what did you do on that committee? Well, you had 12 volunteers that you had to manage. You presented to an audience of 40 to 60 students at weekly meetings. There are 2,000 members in your community. I give this example all the time. If you're doing, especially if you're going into nonprofit work, there's a lot of event planning with nonprofit work. Well, planning an event for 20 people is not the same as planning an event for 200 people, right? Or 200 guests. So anything like that that you can quantify is really going to give some strength and some weight to your resume and what you're able to do. So hopefully these examples are useful to you and you can think about how to write your own resume. I'm just going to pause and look at the chat. Looks like no additional questions, so we're gonna move on. Oops, yes. Now, on a federal resume, any kind of research experience you have would go under the main experience section. On a nonprofit resume, if you are interested in research or you are doing a research thesis or working with a faculty member as a research assistant or graduate assistant, you want to make sure you're putting that information on your resume for sure. So you can add the name of the lab or class or organization. You can use a principal investigator, which is more common in like both the hard and soft sciences, but if there was a principal investigator, you can list the name of your professor with their degree. So you wouldn't say like Dr. Amanda Baker, you would say Amanda Baker, PhD, although I don't have one. You would give an overview or purpose of your project and then list the how, right? What kind of techniques, equipment, skills, software, who are your participants? What were you doing? Why were you doing it? Make sure you talk about your role in the research and any key accomplishments or outcomes. So research can sometimes go on for a long time. If you may work on a research project and there aren't really outcomes right away. So it can be hard to do that, but you may have smaller accomplishments along the way. Or the primary outcome of research tends to be publications or presentations. So on a nonprofit resume, I would expect to see a list of your publications and presentations. You can use the citation style of your field. You know, APA, MLA, and Chicago are probably the most popular ones. List them in reverse chronological order. You can include things like conference presentations, any kind of seminar, poster presentations, invited talks, all publications, including peer-reviewed journal articles, book chapters, books, anything like that that you might be doing. If you, as you move through your academic and professional career, if you have more publications and presentations, you can separate them out into separate sections on a resume. I don't believe there's a good place to put this on the federal resume, but you certainly can include it as an additional document. And it might look something like this. Thank you to Dr. Chen, who I believe is in our computer science department. His CV is online, and it's a really good example of what I'm talking about. So these are in order with the most recent or current items first. You'll notice that Dr. Chen is not always the first author. So they have bolded their name in the list of authors, and you can see it really makes the document stand out as their work, even though they're not the first author. So again, as you move through your academic career, if you're doing more academic research, publications, conference presentations, that kind of thing, you'll end up with a list, something like this. I'm gonna just double check the chat. Looks like no questions so far. Okay. Oops. All right. So on a federal resume, it's really important to include your volunteer or community service work under your experience section. So it would be mixed in with the jobs that you have had and other things that you've done in your professional history. On a nonprofit resume, I would highly encourage you to use a section on your resume called community service or volunteer work, or it can be more specific depending on your primary area of interest. You want to make sure for each position that you include your role, even if your role was just volunteer, still include that, the name of the organization, the city and state if in the US or country outside the US where it was located, and the range of dates you have been a volunteer. You can include any leadership positions. For example, if you have an elected role or you've been promoted, or you work with a professional organization, right? All of that counts. You can talk about things like the knowledge you have gained, your skills, your accomplishments, and remember to quantify everything. So just like the way we would write about your past work experiences, we would write the same way about your volunteer and community service. I see a lot of this on graduate student resumes, and sometimes it's a smaller section towards the end of the document. If you are applying for a nonprofit organization, I would recommend making this section a little more prominent. So when you look at all the sections of your resume, sort the sections by what is most important to the position you are applying for. If it is your current degree program, list that first. If it is your community service, list that first, right? So you don't have to put your work history first if it's unrelated to the jobs you're applying for now, right? On a nonprofit resume, you have the flexibility to put the sections of your resume in order by the most important or best of what you have done based on the position you're applying for. On a federal resume, in the resume builder, you really kind of have to stick to chronological order for all the things. Same with professional organizations. It's likely you're a member of some kind of honor society or professional organization in your field. You want to list those on your resume. You can include your membership, the dates you've been a member. If you have held a leadership position or an elected position, you can include that. You can include committee roles and positions. I recommend spelling out the acronyms or Greek letters, because unless someone is directly in your field, they may not know what that acronym stands for. Be sure to include the range of dates you've been a member. Some folks will write, member since 2019, for example. And again, make sure you're including your knowledge, skills, and accomplishments. Depending on how much other stuff you've got to put on your resume, you might just list the organizations. So I've got 20 years of experience in my field in higher education. So on my resume, I literally just have a list of organizations and the leadership roles that I have held. I mean, I could certainly write bullet points about those things, and I do on my LinkedIn profile, but there's not really space to include it on a 2-page resume. So I don't at this point in my career. Okay, honors, awards, fellowships, and grants. These go on both. There is a place on the federal application, on the federal resume builder, to list honors and awards. And certainly on a nonprofit resume, you would do the same thing. You could have a separate section for this on your nonprofit resume, or you could list these things kind of with the experience they go with. For example, if most of your honors and awards are related to your degree program, you could list all of these things under education. Or if you have, let's say you have lots of grant writing experience, you might have a whole section just for grant writing. Make sure you're including anything that's relevant to your field. Make sure you're including information about the honor or award. So if I tell you that when I was in college, I won the Pam Burgess Award, you probably don't know who Pam Burgess was, and you probably don't know what I got that for. So it's a good idea to put a line on your resume about why you won the award or what criteria they may have used to choose you. You can include things like the name of the department or organization or institution. Make sure you include the dates of the awards. For things like scholarships, like if you had an undergraduate scholarship, for example, do not include the dollar amount. But for grants, always include the dollar amount of successful grants only. So if the award is not obvious from the title, make sure you have a line that explains what it was and why you earned it. Any questions? Okay. So skills. I think on the federal resume, this is more like a checkbox situation where you kind of type in the skill you want to highlight and then it populates on a list, much like LinkedIn. On a nonprofit resume, you want to have a section for your skills. You mostly want to include your technical skills. So soft skills like communication and teamwork and those kinds of interpersonal skills are probably better incorporated into your bullet points. If you have technical skills, any kind of computer skills, or if you're in computer science, of course, computer science majors should have a very intense technical skills section on their resume. Same with anyone in the sciences for those laboratory techniques, equipment, procedures. For other folks, I think it's a good idea to include software and that you're using, any kind of social media platforms, blogs, things like search engine optimization, or business skills. If you've done budgeting or marketing or project management, these are all good kinds of things to include. So you want to make sure you have a skills section on both. For languages, I think it's very important to list languages on a resume, and on the right-hand side are some samples of what that might look like. You can include any languages that you know, and I would say consider your ability to read, write, speak, or translate among languages, and then quantify them in that way. So for example, if I were bilingual, I could say bilingual in Spanish and English. If I am sort of conversational in Spanish. I could get by as a tourist in a Spanish-speaking country. I could put conversational Spanish. If I were, maybe I was born and raised in a different language, I could use native or native proficiency for that language. If I could read, write, speak, and translate in sort of a intermediate, in like a business setting, I might say fluent. If I was sort of almost there, but not quite there, I might say intermediate fluency. If I've just taken 2 or 3 years of a language, I might say basic fluency or conversational. So think about how you're quantifying your language ability on your resume. You can also talk about travel. So particularly with nonprofit organizations and governmental agencies, I think they're interested in travel that is not tourism travel. So if you've studied abroad, if you've lived in another country for any period of time, if you did something like the Peace Corps or WOOF or an organization like that where you lived abroad and really immersed yourself in a culture, make sure you're clear about the expanding your worldview and gaining cultural competence through spending time in other countries. This always looks good on a resume and is certainly the kind of thing both federal and nonprofit agencies would be interested in. If you are applying to a federal position in any of the intelligence agencies, they may be interested in all of the countries you have traveled to, even if they're not listed on your resume as a place that you have lived or studied or worked. But sometimes they will want to see travel to different countries as part of a background check, mostly around the intelligence community, but it's something to be aware of. Any questions so far? Okay. So some other useful content. So these are the kinds of things that I get a lot of one-off questions about where someone's not sure if it's worth including, or they've kind of got this thing, but they forget about it, or they don't think it's relevant. I'm here to tell you it's relevant. If you have a patent, patents are by country. Make sure you list the patent title, country, number, and any pertinent details about that patent. Any kind of certification or licensure should be included with the name of the credential, the name of the credentialing agency or board, and the dates it's valid. If you are in a more creative or artistic field and you have a portfolio or exhibits or theater kinds of things, you can include all of that. More so on a nonprofit resume. And I talked about this already, but awards, fellowships, and grants absolutely should be on both. And if you are applying to additional graduate school, or you're applying for a position where you haven't done something directly related, but close, you could add a section like areas of specialization, research interests, teaching interests. This is particularly good for doctoral candidates who are going for faculty roles, or anyone applying for additional, like if you're in a master's program and applying for a doctoral program, this is an especially good area to include on a resume. Probably not needed on a federal resume at all. Possibly needed on a nonprofit resume. It would kind of depend on your situation and what you were applying for and what additional content you were trying to show. Just checking the chat. If you do have questions, please feel free to put those in the chat at any time. I will check regularly. So things that don't ever go on any kind of resume, never, these are my never, never, nevers. References. So in the old days, we used to put references available upon request at the bottom of a resume. Please don't do that anymore. They will ask for them if they want them. Pictures. So if you have ever applied for a job and uploaded your beautiful resume and then had to retype every single thing on your resume, and I know you know what I'm talking about, that's an applicant tracking system. All kinds of companies of all shapes and sizes use them. And frankly, the resume builder on USA Jobs is an applicant tracking system. Applicant tracking systems are designed to screen out resumes with pictures and graphics. And that is because of bias in hiring. So every once in a while, I will see a photograph or a headshot on a resume. Please don't ever do that. There's a lot of online templates that include a place for a picture. This is my never, never. Now, if you say to me, you know what, Amanda, I'm going to become an actor. More power to you. You need a headshot on one side and your acting resume on the other. And we should set an appointment to talk about that at a separate time. Personal information, with the exception of the things that must go on a federal resume, don't ever put things like your date of birth, your location of birth, your social security number. None of that should ever, your children's names, none of that goes on a resume. It's a little controversial, but hobbies and interests. You know, if I start telling you that I speak Klingon and I like long walks on the beach and candlelight dinners and I'll knit you a scarf, all of a sudden I'm writing a personal ad and not a resume anymore. So I urge you to keep strictly hobbies and interests off your resume, with the exception of if you've been, say, playing piano since you were 3, or riding horses since you were 3, or you know, you've been collecting stamps, I don't know, since you were 3, right? If you've been doing something like that on such a regular basis for so many years of your life, you've probably been a member of some kind of organization, you've probably done some kind of competitions, you've probably taken some kind of lessons. That stuff can go on the resume. But I think you want to be careful if it is unrelated to your goal, to the job that you are applying for, to limit the amount of space you give to unrelated things. So as an example, I once worked with a wonderful young woman who had been a dancer for as long as she could remember. Her resume was 3 pages long, all about dance. And there was about, not quite a quarter of a page on her major, and she was trying to apply for an internship in her major. And it took 3 meetings for me to convince her that she was not going to get an interview with 3 pages of dance for an internship in her major, which was nothing to do with dance. So I just would caution you about hobbies and interests to make sure you're clear on why you're including them and what you're including. If you are an adult with a lot of experience, the rule of thumb is generally 10 years, unless it is directly related to your field. So I have about 20 years of experience in my field. It's all still on my resume, but I am no longer spending any space on my graduate level practicums and internships that I was required to do. They're on there sort of in one bullet point under my degree, but I don't need 5 bullet points for the practicum that I did 23 years ago, right? So I don't necessarily need it. So a good rule of thumb is 10 years for most adults. If you've kind of gone straight through undergrad to grad school, probably it's your college career and above that should be included. We probably don't need anything from high school. We certainly don't need anything from middle school or elementary school. I'm just going to look. I often get questions. The main question I get around other kinds of content is things that give away something personal about myself. So if I'm a member of, or a volunteer, for example, in a club or organization that gives away my gender, my race, my cultural background, my religion, my personal beliefs about abortion or gun control or any other kind of potentially controversial topic, all I would say is I urge you to think about who your reader is and whether or not you want to put that information out on your resume. There's always a question. Would you include unrelated accomplishments if they're notable or would fall? Yes, I would include accomplishments. I would certainly include notable accomplishments, even if they are unrelated. I'm trying to think of a for example. For example, if I've had a poem published, I probably would put that on my resume, even if it's nothing to do with my career field, because it's something interesting and different about me. If I write a food blog that has nothing to do with my career interests, I might put it on my resume, but only if I want all those potential employers to go click on my food blog. Maybe I do and maybe I don't. Now, I'm a knitter. I'm a frantic, crazy knitter. I also collect yarn, which seems to be a whole separate hobby. Nothing whatsoever about knitting is on my resume. I think there's a little bit on my LinkedIn profile because I was trying to start an Etsy shop at one time, but none of that is on my resume and none of it's on my professional resume. But on an interview, if I get asked about hobbies or like a more personal question, I always talk about knitting because it's a pretty innocuous hobby and pretty easy to talk about. Okay. So on a nonprofit resume, you want to be careful of how it looks on the page. There's a million templates out there that you can use. Some of them are easier to edit than others. You certainly can use a template. Remember that it's hard for applicant tracking systems to read a template. So it could be a good use of your time to have a plain text version of your resume that you actually upload into those applicant tracking systems. And 100% for a federal resume, use a very plain text, like save it as a TXT file and upload that. And you will be much better off when it comes to not having to retype quite so much into those applicant tracking systems. I recommend for nonprofits, if you're naming the document, everyone names their resume, new resume, fall 2023 resume. I recommend you name your resume with your name and the name of the organization you're applying to. So mine would be called probably Baker Amanda WCUPA resume. Boom. We still recommend bringing printed copies to interviews and fairs. So if you are planning to attend the job and internship fair or the nonprofit fair that are coming up, we still recommend paper copies. We're just a little behind the times there. The most conservative is black ink, 10 to 12 point font size. You can use 0.5 to 1 inch margins. I say professional fonts. What I probably should say is, don't use Lucinda calligraphy. Don't use Comic Sans, right? We want something plain and simple and easy to read. Use bold for emphasis. You'll notice that if you bold everything, nothing's standing out anymore. So keep the bold simple and use it for emphasis. And we strongly recommend bullet points and not paragraphs. Now, that being said, on a nonprofit resume, you certainly can use color. You have some choice about where your name goes, how your headings look. You can use lines, you can use tables. There are ways you can make the document look more creative. You just may want a plain text version to actually upload into a system, and then a pretty version for when a human looks at it. So you can upload a pretty version as like an extra document on a nonprofit application, or you can take the pretty version with you to your interview. Some general guidelines. My friends, if you hear nothing else from me tonight, hear this: check your spelling. I cannot tell you how many students I have worked with where there's a misspelling on the 3rd line of the document, and they wonder why they're not getting any interviews, or they've left off their degree from Westchester University and then wonder why no one's interviewing them for a graduate assistantship. Make sure it's updated. Make sure you've got your current degree program on there. Check your spelling. You have to be honest on a resume. People get fired for lying on their resume about having degrees that they don't have or having experiences that they've never done. Be consistent. So again, on a nonprofit resume, you kind of have a lot of flexibility and creativity. Be consistent with punctuation, abbreviations, verb tense, format, where you're putting your dates, all of those things. We strongly recommend getting a 2nd and 3rd opinion. You can upload your resume to our Handshake database, which I'll have the link in a moment. And we critique every single resume uploaded into Handshake, so you will get feedback. You can schedule a document review appointment in Handshake, or you can email it to us at cdc.wcupa.edu for feedback. Oh, yeah. I thought I'd take a moment and give you a couple of tips for federal applications. Cast a wide net. Make sure that you are reading the vacancy announcements carefully. Particularly federal, but also state and local vacancy announcements are long and thorough. So make sure that you are using those carefully. And I've mostly been focusing on the difference between federal applications, but if you're applying to a state or local or county agency, you're probably going to be submitting a more normal looking resume. It's the federal resume builder that is the real different one. All of my feedback and information for nonprofit resumes stands for any kind of county, city, state, or local governmental agency that doesn't use a resume builder and just asks you to upload and submit a document. Make sure you're being thorough and polished, especially if you're going for federal. Make sure you're using your veterans preference. Some tips for nonprofit agencies. As you are looking at the possibility of a nonprofit organization, always read their mission statement. You want to make sure that you're working for a nonprofit agency whose mission you agree with and support. The great thing about working for nonprofit organizations is you can work with like-minded people about a cause that matters to you, right? This is our heart talking. So make sure that you are looking at the fit with the culture and the mission of the organization, and then tailor your resume to every position. We used to say, even 5 years ago, I used to say, write one resume and change the cover letter for everything. Now the standard advice is to change the resume for each application so that you can really focus on the mission, the culture, and the keywords in the job description and in the organization. Make sure that you're quantifying and qualifying your experience. Couple last items. Handshake is free to all students at West Chester University. It's a great place to look for jobs and internships. You can also look at the employers planning to come to our upcoming events. You can go to wcupa.joinhandshake.com, or you can download the app in your app store. Just simply search for Handshake and you will find it. For those of you who love networking, I'm just putting in a plug for RAM Nation, which is our great database for networking with West Chester University alumni. All of the alumni on there specifically want to work with and network with our students. So it's a great place to find alumni, like-minded alumni by their major, their maybe an organization they belong to, the degree that they have, or the company that they work for. Big interview. I think interviews are just about the most awkward social situation we're ever in as human beings. So Big Interview is a great place to practice your interview skills. They have a lot of hours of video content on interviewing and also on things like writing resumes, salary negotiation, great stuff there. You can choose a bank of questions based on the industry you're going into, and then you can practice answering them and hopefully build your confidence and your skills with interviewing. All my contact information is here. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram. We have a fabulous undergraduate student employee that runs our Instagram account, and this video will be posted on YouTube, hopefully within the next week or so. I am happy to stick around and answer questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I'll give you a chance to take pictures if that's what you're doing. All right, if there are any questions, I am happy to stick around and answer them. Please feel free to unmute yourself and fire away or pop something into the chat. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.